Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Dan Live. My name is Brian Harper. I'm the Director of Communications here at Divers Alert Network. This afternoon, I'm pleased to introduce Francois Berman, Director of Risk Mitigation here at Dan, and Chloe Strauss, Risk Mitigation Coordinator. They will be speaking to you this afternoon about how to protect your staff and customers. So go ahead and start putting your questions in the chat, and we will get to a Q&A session after the webinar. But without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Francois and Chloe.
Thanks, Brian. So good afternoon, everybody. As I'm sure most of you in the dive business are aware, we've had a pretty daunting time for the past now couple of months. And we've been entertaining questions and trying our really best to give you some guidance as to what to do when things go back to normal. The big issue, of course, is rebuilding your business and getting clients to feel confident enough to come and dive with you. And of course, you then want to make sure that they stay safe while they're with you. And more importantly, you want to take care of your staff. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can actually look at the same picture over here. And I'm going to take you through a couple of points that we think worth sharing with you. We call this process prepping for return. So using the time we have available while things are not quite back to normal to prepare our procedures and our education and really get ourselves ready for when the ball starts rolling again. Now, a lot of what I'm going to talk about this afternoon is going to be common sense. And people tend to overthink and overcomplicate issues. There are some things that are complicated, and to make my life easier, I'm going to give you over to Chloe to discuss some of those more complicated issues. But as you know, we really have to focus on the basics that we hear all the time on television and various other media outlets. Regular hand washing is so important for you to bear in mind, not just in terms of what you do at home, but exactly the same in your business. And soap and water, despite what people think, soap and water remains the most effective way of keeping your hands clean and thereby stopping the spread, the transmission of the virus. Yes, you can use alcohol-based sanitizer. It's very effective, but soap and water is preferred to that. And we get questions about benzalkonium chloride. Can we use that instead? We are sensitive to alcohol-based products. Just so that you know, the CDC have put out a statement that it is not as effective as alcohol. But again, soap and water, and if you need to use something else, that's certainly acceptable. Really important to maintain social distancing. Easy for us to say sitting around here and when we're walking in the supermarket. Not so easy in the confines of a dive shop, in the changing room, and especially out on the boat. So we need to think of how we're going to build this into to our business practices. Clearly, no direct contact. So keep your hands to yourself as far as you can. Of course, not always possible when we're helping people out of the water, but there are things that we can do to make sure that we minimize that. And then, of course, good hygiene. When we sneeze and when we cough, please, let's not spray that out into the open. We should have a mask over our face, but if not, then into your elbow or certainly away from where anybody is gathered. And then the one that's logical, but not always borne in mind, especially when clients are really keen to come diving, is if you're not feeling well, whether you're a client or a business owner or a staff member, please stay at home. A lot of you folks have kind of implored us not to put too many rules and regulations out there. And please, Dan doesn't put out rules and regulations. We're trying to share with you things that you can build into your business, but no two businesses are the same. We get really complicated businesses and we get really basic businesses. So there's no one size that fits all. And we will give you guidance that really is going to stretch right across the spectrum. But what I want to implore you to do is look at the parts that apply to your business and do not believe or think that you would apply everything to every activity that you do. And then, apart from being realistic, remember that while we as a business are trying to do this, we have a shared responsibility from the divers, our clients themselves. They have a role to play. And our job is to educate them and make them aware of what they should be doing to assist us, so that we can provide safe diving experiences and they feel confident in returning to us. One of the techniques we use in risk mitigation is called risk assessment. And what that really means to you is this is how you determine which aspects of what we're going to be talking about refer to your business. So what this really requires is a mental or physical walkthrough through your business and the activities and seeing where you have the potential for transmission of the disease or where people can end up in an unsafe situation. And then, of course, you can end up with a whole long list of these things. Some of them are relevant and some of them completely irrelevant. But in order to get some degree of prioritization of these risks, you need to think to yourself, well, how likely is it that I'm going to, or someone will have an exposure to that area of risk? And what is the likely consequence going to be? And with those three things, the fact that you have an exposure to the risk, the hazardous situation, it's likely that you could get a transmission and therefore, likely that you could end up with some form of negative consequence, somebody getting ill. You then focus on the areas of your business that are really important, pay as much attention to them as you can, and then clearly you can't negate anything else. But when it comes to issues such as a small boat and social distancing is difficult to do, it will force you to look for other areas that you can use to mitigate things that you cannot address. We need to be realistic, and I'll say that a few times to you, because while you'll hear us talk about engineering out the risk and applying administrative controls, meaning procedures and training and awareness and reinforcement, you'll hear us talk about PPE, personal protection equipment, so those are your masks and gloves and eye protection. Sometimes we can have a combination, but most of all, it's going to be something realistic and something practical that will work for you. And then my last word of advice on this is you can put all the plans you want to in place. If they're not realistic, people cannot follow them. And you, as the business owner, the dive professional, you need to monitor these things you put in place. Monitor whether the disinfection procedure you have in place is working. Are your clients following your requests? Are they understanding what it is you're saying? And when you do that monitoring, you can see what is working and what is not, and then you go back and adjust your various controls that you put in place. And that way, you'll have the greatest assurance that you are getting the effect that you really hope to get. Okay, so we have, I won't call it downtime. I think many of us are, already engaged in activities, building our way back up to when we'll be back in full swing, when they lift the controls. And some of you, of course, are already back in action. But this is the time to prepare yourself, to prepare your procedures, make sure that they work. Have a look at what disinfectants you might need to use, and please reach out to us, as Chloe will explain a little bit later to you. But make sure that these procedures are going to work, so practice them. Decide on who needs PPE, make sure we have plenty of stock of that, hand sanitizers for clients and so on. Have a look at the layout of your business, your classroom, your filling station, your rental equipment, to see if you can minimize the amount of people in an area at any one time and maybe control the flow. And that way avoid people contacting each other, maintaining the social distance, and trying really hard to achieve what you can achieve. But you will find there are going to be areas where there's an inevitability that you'll get contact. And so it's important that all the other procedures you put in place are then brought to the fore. So once you've done your risk assessment, most of this will become pretty logical to you. But I'd like to give you a couple of prompts. And I'm going to go through these things fairly quickly, so please don't think that you have to remember, write them all down. For those of you that would like a copy of the presentation, I'll send you a more comprehensive one that we'll talk about now to give you some of those prompts that you can use to structure the way that you're going to run your business. So just reach out to us at riskmitigation@dan.org. I'll repeat that a few times for you, and please, we'll be happy to share the presentation with you. So there are two steps really in dealing with our staff and dealing with our clients. The first is to limit transmission of the virus, and the second part is going to be the active disinfection. So the one is going to be in our procedures and our controls and what we're going to work out now, but we still do need to disinfect, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And Chloe will give you some clues as to how to find these elusive disinfectants that are going to work. So in limiting transmission, clearly, the obvious ways are going to be looking at the movement through your shop, to your boats, on the jetty, wherever you're going to have clients and staff members, and limit the access, limit the number of people that could be in there at a particular time, and try your best to limit them coming in contact with each other. Sounds easy in theory. It's actually not that difficult in practice once you apply your mind to it, but the point is not to panic. If it's going to be a confined environment, well, then we need to pay attention to disinfection, other forms of PPE. Clearly, you need to disinfect. We'll talk a bit about that in a moment again, but we need to keep things clean. That's obviously one way that we avoid transmission. And again, hand washing, hand washing, hand washing, that's going to be the primary barrier to prevent the virus getting into a place where it can be transmitted. Focus on your high-risk activities, and the two that I can think of that are going to strike you the most, we've seen this from the questions we get. The one is rental equipment. So we have this disinfection issue with rental equipment and sometimes people needing to try things on. And then we have the boats on the dive site, and each of these will require very specific ways to deal with it. I don't really want to belabor the next point, which is what we call screening and observing. And remember, as a business owner, you've got to screen and observe your staff each day they come to work and while they're at work, and you have to screen and observe your clients. Now, you're not meant to be medical experts, and by no means are we going to tell you the definitive way to screen people for COVID. It's not clearly practical. But apply your mind logically to this. Make sure that they do fill in your medical questionnaire, your medical disclaimer. Visually check that they look okay. If they're perspiring, if they don't look well, then you might want to ask them a couple more questions. For those of you that are really concerned about this, especially if you're in areas where it's warm, tropical weather tends to make most of us perspire, and you're now not sure whether perspiration is heat or perspiration could be fever related, well, then you might want to consider getting yourself a good quality thermometer. We get infrared thermometers that are really, really so basic that they won't see past obvious things like the heat outside, and then you get the better quality ones that will give you a far more accurate indication of the person's temperature. Clearly, you're going to use PPE to limit the transmission and obviously to limit it to your staff members themselves. And please don't forget to put up the signage so that you tell people where they should be wearing their protection. We see that every time we go to the supermarket that we need to put our mask on. But what is important with PPE is to educate and educate and educate your staff, because as with anything else, we have a noisy workshop where the compressor is, we give our staff members earmuffs to wear, and everything goes fine for a couple of weeks, and then we walk in there and of course the earmuffs are around the neck or they're hanging up on the peg. That's not acceptable. And as a business owner, as the operator, you need to make sure that your staff are compliant. And by the way, that means you need to comply and set the example yourself. And how often haven't we seen that take place? And then the areas where you want to focus for disinfection are going to be the one that we are really concerned about. We don't really have too many answers to, are the changing rooms, especially where there's going to be water all over the show and clients walking in and walking out. Where they lean on the countertops, you might want to ask them to stand back from the counter, or you then just need to disinfect the counter on a very regular basis. Things that get touched very often might be cupboards, it might be the door, so anything where you have areas that clients or staff members are touching. We've, I think, covered card reading machines for credit cards. We've seen at most places they'll have a plastic covering on there, but it needs to be considered. Either you might want to keep the buttons that only the staff member uses them or only the clients use them, but it requires a little bit of thinking. Any common equipment that staff use, certainly in the workshops, out in the rental areas, computers, try as much as possible to limit each of them to their own equipment. We'll talk again about classrooms, but if we're teaching, never mind social distancing, we still need to clean down the chairs and tables and any training equipment that our clients are touching. We might protect ourselves as staff members with gloves, but that's not going to prevent the spread of the virus, because people that aren't wearing gloves can then pick it up. Ultimately, though, you need to be realistic. And while we know, and I'm not the medical expert, but we certainly know that transmission is primarily from the droplets that are airborne when people exhale, people that are infected. It is possible to pick it up from surfaces. We know that eventually it will become inactive on surfaces. It's not a particular high-risk area, but if it's a walkway, for instance, and people aren't touching the floor well, you might disinfect that once a day. If it's an area like a countertop or where people are trying on masks and things, then you might want to disinfect that far more regularly. So common sense, be practical, be realistic, and make sure that everybody is part of this big picture. Right, now we've looked at our staff, and I always, in my presentations on risk mitigation, I always like to focus on the staff first. If we take care of our staff, they will take care of our clients. So often we focus on the clients, we forget about the staff, and clearly infection is going to be spread even more effectively that way. Again, in terms of our clients, many clients come in with their personal equipment, and you want to make sure that they keep that under their own control. They take it onto the boat, they take it off the boat, try to limit any infection they might have to their own equipment, and encourage them as much as possible, and where practical, to clean their equipment and disinfect the equipment at home rather than putting it into a communal area and thereby potentially spreading the virus, if of course they are infected. Probably a wise idea to close your showers at this stage of the game if you have them, and let your clients shower when they get back home. That's an area really difficult to manage. It could be for the short term. We don't know how long this is all going to play out for. And then obviously your clients need to understand your protocols and your procedures for disinfection. And don't just assume that they walk in and they know that this particular solution needs this amount of soak time and this amount of rinsing. So if they're going to be using your equipment, then they really need to understand how to go about disinfecting it. But ultimately, we want them to try to keep their hands to themselves, take care of their own equipment, and limit the spread of the virus that way. Once again, when they sign up to come and dive with you, observe them. Because if they come into the virus, clearly it'll go across to your staff and to other clients. The same way as you want to observe your staff to make sure that they don't then spread it in the opposite direction. That's a tricky area. You probably want to reach out for some advice. We've seen some publications, some guidance put out there where they give you a couple of steps that you can build in, additional steps in terms of your medical questionnaire. The reality, though, is to do it carefully, meaningfully, make sure that it's not just a gloss over, and pay attention to things that don't look, kind of normal. Probably a good idea to keep clients out of the rental areas. Of course, you've got, equipment that's going to be swapped between clients. You probably, in terms of a disinfection, going to need to make sure that you don't use your rental equipment on two different clients the same day, especially things like wetsuits, unless you've got a really, really effective disinfecting procedure. And then when you have your clients returning rental gear, please keep that completely separate so that it can be disinfected, rinsed, hung up to dry before it then goes back into an area where this rental gear is then handed out to the next set of clients coming in. And then in terms of your clients and disinfection, again, you want to encourage them to use soap and water. Make sure that it's available. And if you don't have that, then provide hand sanitizers at strategic places where your clients might gather, where they enter your building, when they've got onto the boat. Really not difficult things to do. And just by having those sanitizers and various washing facilities available, you'd be continuously prompting the clients to pay attention to the fact that we need to be aware that we don't inadvertently either pick up or spread the virus. Clearly, when they've had their training, they want to have confidence too. This is not just about you, but when they go into the classroom, they want to know that they don't have to then disinfect the chairs and the tables and the equipment themselves. Another interesting one is when clients want to try on equipment in your retail shop, you might want to limit the number of items that are tried on, so you keep some of them locked away. But if they go to try a mask on or a snorkel or a mouthpiece, then you need to have some good quality, effective disinfecting wipes. And obviously, after the client has handled it, wipe it down, set it aside so that it can dry. And that way, you are probably going to be very effective in ensuring that any form of spread, other of course than people exhaling the droplets. And that's why I know the WHO has sent out a couple of confusing signals recently, but I think we can all accept at this stage that wearing masks is essential. Just the basic cloth or surgical mask, none of these masks that we should be leaving to our healthcare providers to use, but that's a very effective way to limit the airborne spread. And again, let your clients know how you're handling the rental equipment, that they too can be confident that, hey, this wetsuit is wet. The person that used it before, who are they? When did they last use the equipment? So the way to assure them is to educate them and let them know what your procedures are. And I know many of you are thinking all of the stuff to bear in mind and how am I going to focus on what's already a very busy activity. But when you put practical procedures in place and you consistently apply them, it becomes second nature. To most of us these days, we don't touch our hands and our faces. So We are at a point, I think, where most of us socially have been accustomed to this, at least I hope so. But in terms of a business, you probably want to get certainly your staff to a point where it is second nature to them. So I'm going to hand you over to Chloe in a moment, but for those of you that would like to access some of our resources, you might want to take a snapshot of the screen. But again, please let us know, we can send it to you. There is additional guidance out there for business owners, and OSHA here in the US has put out a publication. You can see the link there, and you can see the QR code. That's aimed at businesses going back into business, a whole range of different businesses, some that see clients, some that just protect their own workforce, but some really good guidance there. We've taken quite a bit of time and trouble to listen to your questions and to publish articles, and we have, as some of you will know, we have a COVID-19 webpage where we have information out there for you to absorb. And what we've done is we've followed consistently OSHA, the EPA, the CDC, and various other organizations to make sure that we're giving you what is current and what seems to be working. It's not an excuse, but I do need to share with you that we're learning through this process too, as is the EPA, as is the CDC. And we need to stay on our toes and absorb the new information that comes in. Disinfectants are changing. More and more disinfectant manufacturers are taking the trouble to get their products certified. So these are times of change. We need to stay on our toes, especially if we're responsible for staff and for clients. If you have any questions from what we're speaking about today or anything else in terms of how to control infection and how to disinfect items, then please, anytime, send us an email to riskmitigation@dan.org. Also, if it's a medical question relating to fitness to dive, signs, symptoms, what happens after I've had COVID and diving and so on, please send that to medic@dan.org. And our medical team of doctors and highly qualified medical personnel will be able to answer those questions for you. And where they can't, they will certainly know where to go and find the answers. And then just lastly, just to remind you, there's our COVID-19 webpage. Probably best to go there directly from this QR code or from this site, so you'd have to navigate down to it. And we are constantly updating and adding new information to that. So, keep a lookout. You'll find things that you might not have heard of before coming up. And what we do too is after webinars like this, we get additional questions, which we then research, and eventually we publish them, put them up on our website too. So you'll have a chance to answer some questions a bit later, but what I'd like to do now is to hand you back over to Chloe and let her take you through some of the processes that we've been talking about and some of the complexities, I think, that or confusing issues that many of you have been sending back to us in terms of questions. So Chloe.
Great, thanks, Francois. So I just wanted to use this time to answer some common questions that we've been getting. But mostly, I know there's been a lot of confusion about using List N and how do I look up a product and how do I look up a product's EPA registration. So I thought I'd use this time or part of this time to just share my web browser and walk you guys through it step by step. So give me 1 second and I will share. All right, so hopefully you guys can see the List N webpage on the EPA's website. And they've recently come out with a new tool right here that makes searching much easier than it used to be. So if we launch this, we can search by registration number, active ingredient, keyword search. So this kind of thing is really useful. Let's say your business, you want to find a disinfectant wipe to just use on countertops and around the shop. If I enter wipe and search, it shows 10 entries. And I can sort these by contact time, so shortest to longest. I can sort it by active ingredient, all of these really, really great things. So I'm going to use an example to show you guys how to look up a product's registration number. So this one's called Mediclean, and its registration number is 70385-6. So if I search that, oops. Okay, well, apparently 70, hold on. This is interesting. It's on List N, I know it is. Okay, let's do it this way. so it is on list N. And so I've got the EPA registration number. I know it's on list N. And I know that to kill COVID-19, I'm supposed to follow the directions for preparing it for feline calcivirus. So this doesn't mean that it doesn't kill COVID-19. It just might have multiple sets of directions. And this is the way that list N is differentiating between the sets of directions. So they say, find this virus and prepare the solution as if you were trying to kill it. So using I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. Oh, I only copied part of it. And I'm going to go to the search for registered pesticide products, and I'm going to search for any type of product. And here I will paste the number and hit enter. And it will show all of the products past registrations. And the one I want is most recent. So if I click to open that, it takes me to the registration for the product. And I've already looked through this, so I know that the terminology we want is on page 8. Okay, so if we look here, first of all, we see the words half mask respirators, full face breathing apparatus, gas masks. So what this tells us is that this product has been tested and we know that it's safe to inhale, which is really important. And a lot of products are going to just have this terminology that I've highlighted in them and nothing additional specific to scuba. The nice thing about this product is that it does specifically call out underwater diving equipment. So here we have inflatable wings, harnesses, hoods, water shoes, neoprene garments. So we know that this product can be used on these types of surfaces. So if you'll notice, it says to clean and deodorize, it mentions neoprene garments, but to disinfect, it doesn't. It only mentions hoods and water shoes. And I believe this is because neoprene is a porous material, and it's just really hard to disinfect and get inside those pores. So let's look at another product. This other product is called Virkon S, and I'm going to go ahead and type in the registration number. So yeah, so it's on list N. So if I see that it's on list N, I'm going to go ahead and check the registration number. Okay, I don't know why it's not letting me highlight. And I'll go back to the QGC page and I will search again. It's going to take me back to this page. And I can again find all of the products past registrations and click on the most recent one. So Virkon S is a little bit different, and I chose this one specifically because of how the registration is laid out. And you will run into this with some products. So if we go to the page's kind of applications, all of the different surfaces or products that the product can be used on are separate, and they each have their own separate sets of directions. So if I kind of scroll down, I can see that there's a big list here: halters, ropes, walls and floors that have manure. So this product is really specific to animals, vets, animal husbandry, farms, that kind of stuff. So if I know that the terminology I'm looking for is respirator, I can just search respirator. And I'm only seeing respiratory syndrome, right? Because you're going to run into this. So it's just saying viruses or bacteria that you can use it against. So we know we're not finding the word respirator in this registration. Another really interesting thing about Virkon is that if I search the word metal, there is a place here that says do not soak metal objects in Virkon for long periods. So it's really important to read these registrations very, very thoroughly. I know it's super boring and they're super complicated. Once you go through a couple, you'll kind of get the hang of it. But these are very intense documents with a lot of information and a lot of nuances. So it's really important that you look these up and follow the directions for whatever product that you're using. And if it says it can't be used on scuba equipment or respirators, it's really important that you don't use this stuff to disinfect your scuba equipment. All right, so I've stopped sharing and I'm just gonna go through a couple more questions with you guys. So something that we've received a lot of questions about is disinfecting with UV light. This is a tough question because it is used in some industries such as dentistry. They'll use UV light to disinfect. But the thing about scuba equipment is that it's got a lot of like crevices, especially if you think about how a regulator is set up. You know, we're saying you need to immerse the regulator into a disinfectant to really get in all of those cracks and crevices. Well, UV light doesn't reflect, especially UVC light, which you guys have been hearing a lot about. It doesn't reflect. So if there's a shadow, if the part that you're trying to disinfect is not directly exposed to the light, it's not going to be disinfected. So you would have to take every single little piece of your regulator apart, lay it all out, disinfect it, flip it over, do the other side, and that's not practical. UVC light is also pretty dangerous. It's not really good for humans. It's not good for our skin or eyes to come in contact with the light. So it's just not really a great option. The next one we get a lot about is wetsuit disinfection. And we are learning about this stuff, you know, with you guys, like Francois said. And we're working really hard to come up with good, solid answers. So using a product that says it's safe to use on wetsuits or on neoprene is very, very important. But if that's not accessible to you, for example, Mediclean is not sold in California, or if you're in another country, you might not be able to get it. So regular old soap and water and scrubbing is probably going to be your best bet. All right, so we also get a lot of questions about what if my product doesn't have an EPA registration number? If the product is not sold in the United States, it's not going to have an EPA registration number. So if it does, obviously you can look it up on List N, you can look up the registration for the product. If it doesn't, you should look at your country's government's website if they have you know, a Center for Disease Control, and they'll have similar registration programs. Another thing you can do is if the product has a parent company in the United States, you might be able to look up its parent product, and then that product will have an EPA registration number that you can look up. And now I was going to talk a little bit about what to look for in a dive shop. Francois really covered a lot of that very well. I don't feel the need to say much more. If you're a diver just looking to go diving and you're worried about COVID, the one thing that I would do is call before you book your trip and ask. Ask what they're doing, ask what their disinfectant is, what their infection control procedures are. And if their answer isn't satisfactory to you, you might just consider diving elsewhere. But a lot of these procedures are really up to dive shops to institute and enforce themselves. So I would just call and ask, see what they say. If you'd like to direct them to our website or to riskmitigation@dan.org, you know, we're happy to assist you in that way as well. So that's really all I have. I don't know, Francois, you might have something to add, but we can also go back into doing questions now.
Sure. If there's nothing else I want to add from my side, Chloe, you've kind of covered most of it. The procedure with the disinfectants and the various EPA documentation is confusing. Please reach out to us. We can help you through it. We've helped many of you through it, and we've also found that things are changing. As Chloe pointed out, there's a new feature there. So it's worthwhile keeping it on your browser if you're trying to look at different types of products. There are going to be some places where there is a solution. There are going to be places where there isn't a solution. And as Chloe correctly said, soap and water with agitation, that's going to be, the CDC are, you know, happy enough to tell us that that's the best way to do it. Then we need to follow our lead from them. And, you know, people have spoken about bleach, which is a really, really good solution. But some of you don't like the aftertaste. Some of you concerned about the effect of that on your rubber and silicone products. So there is no one size fits all. There is no one product that covers everything. We need to be flexible. We need to be practical. It needs to be affordable. You know, some of these disinfectants are really good, and they just, you know, we can't afford them in the quantities we need to use them. But again, reach out to us. We are learning as you are learning, and we're sharing the information as best we can.
And if you guys need help using the List N tool or reading through the registration for a product, you know, please just send us the product and the registration number, and we're happy to help you with that.
And that's also a great segue to say that you could also tune back into the relevant section of this video in which Chloe shows you how to go through list in. This video will live on YouTube, or excuse me, it will live on Facebook. It will also be uploaded to YouTube in the next couple of days. So if you go to youtube.com/diversalertnetwork.tv, you'll be able to find this presentation there on our channel. I will also say some people in the comments have asked about the PowerPoint presentation. Both that and the link to the YouTube video will also be on dan.org/COVID-19. That website has been our clearinghouse in recent months. We've put all the articles about disinfection, about how long the virus lasts on surfaces, about updated training and education recommendations. So that's a great site that you can check out if you haven't already. What other questions have we got? Go ahead and hit us with your questions in the chat if you have any. We have time to field a few of these. All right, here's a good one. Mitch asks, can COVID be blown into tanks at the yoke when filling if personnel are infected?
So do you want me to take a stab at that?
Go ahead.
We have answered that. It's in our Q&As, and it's a good question. You know, people are concerned for good reason that once you hand it over to somebody else. So clearly, the first step is whoever's doing the filling is the one that needs to be infected. And there are various steps. Remember, in this, we can fill the cylinder where we're going to handle the filling whip onto the cylinder valve. And then on the other end of it, when we're dressing the cylinder with the regulator set, exactly the same thing can take place. So yes, if you put your finger or you sneeze onto the valve on the cylinder or onto the filling whip where the yoke is, it is possible in theory to get the virus to enter into the cylinder. None of us can really tell you at this stage whether the adiabatic heating of the cylinder while it's being filled will be hot enough to actually inactivate the virus, because what we do know is that the quicker you want to deactivate or inactivate the virus, the higher the temperature. But when we fill a cylinder, we have heating that continues for as long as it takes to fill the cylinder. And there's quite a temperature gradient from where the gas is in the center, where you get your adiabatic heating, and the gas that touches the wall of the cylinder. So I'm not going to venture out and say it will kill it. We suspect that most of the time it's going to be deactivated. But rather than take a chance, good basic hygiene, wiping down the cylinder valve, wiping down the yoke fittings between fillings. Please, it depends on how you've set up your system. So if you've got good control, only one person's allowed to fill, they have practiced good hand hygiene, they're wearing a face mask, it's very unlikely that you're going to get any contamination on your valve, the cylinder valve, or onto the filling whip, or onto your first stage regulator when you put that onto the cylinder. So yes, it's possible. You can wipe it down with a suitable disinfectant. Please, just if you're going to use alcohol, remember alcohol is highly flammable. When we open our cylinder valve, you get a rapid rush of air into the first stage, and you get certainly the potential, even with air, to create enough heat to ignite those alcohol vapors. So if you're going to wipe it down with alcohol, make sure that you give it plenty of time to actually evaporate. But working with care, wearing a mask, the gloves are not going to help, because if you touch something else that's contaminated, you're going to put it onto the cylinder valve. Don't touch the opening area of the cylinder valve. That would probably be the best way to prevent surface contact. But yes, it's a valid question, and I don't think, unless unless we're unlucky and we lose control of our procedures, it's not likely to happen if we are aware that in theory it can happen. So I hope I got that nailed away for you, Ryan.
Indeed, thank you. One for you, Chloe. Philippe is asking about long soaks in soapy water for regulators. Is that recommended? And before you answer, there's a second part to his question about chlorine damaging metal. And so first tell us about soapy water and long soaks there.
Yeah, so, we, like Francois said at the beginning of the presentation, we follow the CDC guidelines. And so, we know that soap and water don't necessarily kill microorganisms, whether we're talking about COVID or the flu or the cold or whatever. If you dip your hands in soapy water, that's not really doing anything. It's kind of the mechanical action of of washing your hands that's going to kill pathogens, that's going to make the soap pick them up off of your hands or off surfaces and rinse them away with water. So just using soapy water and soaking something isn't necessarily going to do anything. It's that combined with scrubbing that really works to kill or remove pathogens, including COVID-19. So a soak in soapy water probably isn't going to be the best thing. A disinfectant that we know is going to kill all of these pathogens is going to be what you want to use. And then the second question, I'm assuming, is in reference to bleach. Brian, yeah?
I expect so, yeah. So the way he phrased it was chlorine damages metal, if you were talking about this. So yeah, that sounds right. Obviously, chlorine in a pool or scuba gear is regularly subjected to that, but chlorine bleach, I think, would be what he's referring to.
Francois, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. You know, chlorine can damage metal, but if you're using it, you know, sparingly or in a weak dilution, it's probably not going to be an issue. So if you don't have access to a disinfectant on list N, the CDC recommends that you use 1/3 cup of bleach per gallon of water or 25 milliliters per liter of water with a 1-minute soak. And this isn't going to be high enough of a concentration or long enough of a soak to really cause damage. Francois, is that?
Yeah, so that's about right. For those of you that are concerned about this, there was a paper published many years ago about an anthrax attack in a building, and they had to disinfect a building here in the US. And they had a lot of metal damage, but you need to remember that those were days and days and days of exposure to very high levels of gaseous chlorine. Yes, if you soak things in bleach for long enough, it will discolor the metal. Even stainless steel will discolor. In fact, stainless steel doesn't like chlorine unless you get a certain grade of stainless, so that they're valid concerns. But if you soak it for a minute and you then rinse it afterwards with clean water properly and allow it to dry, very, very unlikely you're going to end up with any issues unless you have, you know, a carbon steel that is not painted, in which case, you know, even small amounts of moisture are going to cause that to corrode. But the solution that the CDC recommends and the very short soak time, followed by a proper rinse with fresh water and drying, is certainly not going to cause any significant damage.
Excellent. All right, we'll take another look at the questions coming in. It looks like we've just about covered them all. Chloe or Francois, anything else to add?
Yeah, so if you come up with any more questions, please feel free to contact us at riskmitigation@dan.org for any of your disinfection questions, about disinfectants using list N, or going back to diving, you know, during and after COVID.
I think maybe just finishing from my side, Brian, our target is to get back into business. You as a business owner want to get people to come diving with you. You need to be able to convince them that by diving with you, they're going to be safe. The best way you can do that is good information on your website, proper briefing when they arrive with you. It sounds tedious, you know, many clients don't want to hear the briefings, but this is the time where it's so important to convince them and show them. And then please be consistent the whole time those clients are with you. They will walk away feeling confident that there's a far less chance of getting the disease, even sitting on a boat with 6 people shoulder to shoulder, because we're following all the other things that we can do. But at the same time, we don't want you to be overwhelmed by this long list of things that you need to consider. Remember, even with social distancing, the concept of social distancing was, if you can't protect yourself with a mask or anything else, then keep at least 6 feet apart. Now, we will do both, but at least one of those is going to help us to limit the transmission. There is no 100% solution. You know, many people out there are asymptomatic and they're carriers of the virus. So the risk is not going to be elevated while they're diving with you if we follow the basic precautions, but you can certainly assure them that you are doing the best you can with proper techniques, good disinfection, good awareness, good education, good PPE, and they will be your returning clients. If they, you know, if they feel they're ready for this, you're going to convince them. So that's really why we want you to give you as many tools as we can, so that you're ready for it and you can build your businesses back up again. It's been a terrible time for all of us.
All right. Well, thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Francois. And thanks to all of you who joined us this afternoon. We hope to see you again in 2 weeks for our next Dan Live webinar.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.